My name's Mark. I'm 43, and I live in Asheville, North Carolina, a place that's always felt more like home than the family I was born into. You see, I've always been the black sheep, the odd one out, the one people like to pat on the head and remind that I was too sensitive when their words cut a little too deep. It didn't matter that I worked my way up from a crummy IT job to running my own business, that I paid off my student loans before I was 30, or that I bought a house with a view most people only dream of. None of that counted. To my family, especially to my cousins Jason and Rachel, I was just Mark, the awkward one, the one they could poke fun at every holiday dinner while they leaned back in their chairs, talking about their glamorous lives. The first signs of trouble? They were always there. The little digs about how I was still single, the way they'd laugh when I brought my own bottle of wine to dinner because I didn't trust Jason to pick something that wasn't overpriced swill, the way my mother would call and beg me to come to family gatherings, whispering on the phone like she was asking me to do a favor she knew I didn't owe her. But this time was different. This time, the stakes were real. It started, as these things often do, with a phone call from my mother. I was halfway through a quiet Sunday morning, coffee in hand, sunlight pouring across my kitchen table, the sound of the mountains just outside my window. Then came the buzzing of my phone, and before I even picked up, I knew. My mother's voice was soft but insistent, threaded with that particular mix of guilt and hope only a mother can conjure. She told me Jason and Rachel were in town, that they were planning a big family dinner at this new, upscale place downtown, and wouldn't it mean so much to her if I came? I could hear the unspoken plea in her voice, the silent panic that I might once again say no, the way I had the last 4 times. I should have declined. I should have stayed in my little mountain sanctuary, sipping coffee and pretending the world beyond Asheville didn't exist. But I heard something in her voice, maybe a crack, maybe just fatigue, and I caved. When I walked into that restaurant, I knew I was in enemy territory. Jason was already holding court at the center of the table, his arm slung over the back of his chair like a king surveying his loyal subjects. Rachel was laughing too loudly, the kind of laughter that feels rehearsed, sharp enough to draw blood if you get too close. And the moment they saw me, their faces lit up, not with joy, but with the wicked gleam of people who think they've won before the game's even begun. My mother looked relieved, brushing a quick kiss on my cheek. But Jason wasted no time pulling me into the spotlight. He stood, arms wide, announcing to the whole table, "Look who made it. Mark, the man of mystery." Everyone turned, smiling those polite, sharp smiles. Rachel clapped her hands like I was some performing dog who'd finally obeyed a long-ignored command. I sat at the end of the table, half listening as Jason and Rachel took over the conversation, tossing back stories about their latest vacations, new cars, beach houses, stock options. My stomach tightened, but I kept my face still. I was used to this game, the performance, the show, the unspoken contest of who could make me feel the smallest. But I should have known. This night wasn't just about showmanship. It was a setup. The dinner unfolded like a slow-motion car crash, beautiful from a distance, horrifying when you're inside it. The drinks kept coming, the laughter got louder, and the small jabs turned into thinly veiled insults. Jason bragged about his promotion, Rachel cooed over her designer shoes, and my aunt leaned across the table to ask if I was still doing that little computer thing like my business was some basement hobby instead of a company with 20 employees. I played along. That's the thing they never saw coming. I smiled, nodded, asked polite questions, even raised a glass when Jason toasted to family, the people who matter most. That one almost got a laugh out of me almost. But then came the moment I'd been dreading, the reason they lured me here in the first place. When the dessert plates were cleared, Jason leaned back with a satisfied sigh and draped his arm across Rachel's chair. "Mark," he said casually, "since you're the success story, why don't you handle the bill?" His voice was light, teasing, but his eyes were sharp, waiting for the blow to land. Rachel clapped her hands together, grinning. "Oh, that would be so sweet of you, Mark. We should celebrate you, after all." My stomach sank, but outwardly I stayed calm. The waiter appeared with the bill, a sleek leather folder that looked heavy enough to bruise. Jason reached over without even looking at it and handed it straight to me, like it was already settled. I opened it. The number stared up at me like a slap across the face. $4,345. For one dinner. My jaw tensed. I thought of the oysters no one finished, the bottles of wine Jason ordered without asking, the fancy steaks, the desserts Rachel barely touched. I could feel all their eyes on me, even my mother's, though hers were tinged with guilt, not expectation. For a flicker of a second, I considered it. Paying would end this. Paying would let me leave quietly, as always. But something inside me, something that had been simmering for years, finally hardened. I closed the folder, placed it back in the center of the table, and smiled. The moment my fingers left that bill folder, I felt the air shift. It was subtle, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the pressure drops and the birds fall silent. Jason's smirk froze in place, his hand half raised with a glass of overpriced whiskey. Rachel tilted her head, a flicker of confusion in her perfectly made-up eyes. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands in my lap, and let the silence stretch. "I think you've got this covered, Jason," I said smoothly. My voice was calm, measured, and underneath it ran a steel they'd never heard from me before. Jason laughed, too loud, too sharp. "Oh, come on, Mark, don't be like that. We were just having a little fun." But I watched the muscles jump in his jaw. He hadn't expected resistance. He never did. Rachel leaned in, her voice honeyed. "Mark, it's not a big deal. You know you're doing so well, why not treat everyone?" I smiled politely, like a man watching a child try to explain calculus. "I think tonight's your treat, Rachel." My mother cleared her throat, her hands twisting in her lap. I felt a pang of guilt, but I didn't waver. I had spent too many years mistaking politeness for peace, too many years carrying the weight of everyone's expectations because I was afraid of being called selfish. Not anymore. Jason gave a dry chuckle, pushing the bill back toward me with 2 fingers. "Seriously, Mark." I didn't touch it. "Seriously, Jason." The table had gone quiet now, the kind of quiet that makes waiters linger just out of sight, sensing the storm. Jason's face turned red. "You know what? Fine. Fine." He pulled out his wallet with a dramatic sigh, muttering something under his breath as he flipped through his cards. Rachel whispered urgently in his ear, but he waved her off. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. For the first time, I realized I wasn't angry, not really. I was clear in a way I hadn't been for years. I didn't owe them this. I never had. As Jason handed over his card, I caught his eye and gave him a quiet nod. Not of apology, but of farewell. Jason's card hit the table with a sharp snap, the sound slicing through the tense quiet like a knife. The waiter, a young man with the haunted look of someone who'd seen too many family dramas play out at his tables, stepped forward with a carefully neutral smile. Jason handed over the card without meeting his eyes. I watched as the waiter disappeared toward the register, Jason's jaw tight as a drum. Rachel was already on her phone, furiously texting, maybe venting to a friend, maybe calculating how to spin this moment into some self-pitying story later. My mother sat frozen, her fingers clasped so tightly I thought she might snap them. I caught her eye, and for a moment, just a flicker, I saw something there I hadn't seen before. Not disappointment, not guilt, but a hint of respect. That almost broke me, but I held steady. Jason let out a sharp breath through his nose. "You know," he muttered, "we were just trying to include you." I tilted my head slightly. "And I appreciate the invitation," I said softly, "but I'm done paying for a seat at this table." Rachel made a wounded sound, a sharp little inhale like I'd slapped her. "Mark, that's not fair." I raised one hand, palm out, a quiet gesture. "Rachel, it's fine." The waiter returned with the receipt. Jason scribbled his signature so hard the pen nearly tore the paper. I stood, smoothing my jacket. My legs felt light, like they weren't quite attached to the floor, but I stood taller than I had in years. I looked around the table one last time, the stiff smiles, the darting eyes, the uncomfortable fidgeting, and let out a long, quiet breath. "Take care, everyone," I said simply. And then I walked away. As I stepped into the cool night air, the city hummed around me, laughter from the patio, the low rumble of traffic, the scent of rain on pavement. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one left holding the bag, the one trying to patch over the cracks, the one bending to keep the peace. For the first time, I had walked out on my terms. The walk to my car felt longer than it should have. Every step away from that restaurant, away from their voices and their carefully polished smiles, peeled another layer off my chest, like I could finally breathe in a way I hadn't for years. By the time I reached the parking garage, I had my keys in hand, fingers trembling just slightly. Not from regret. No, that ship had sailed long ago, but from something that almost felt like freedom. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, staring at the steering wheel, the city lights flickering in the distance. For so long, I'd carried this weight without even realizing it. The weight of being the good son, the successful cousin, the one who always made sure everyone else was comfortable, even at my own expense. Tonight, I'd set it down. The drive through Asheville was quiet, the streets half empty, the storefronts glowing under the soft buzz of street lamps. As I turned onto my street, I caught sight of the mountains, dark, still, watching, and for the first time in ages, they didn't feel like walls closing in, but arms stretched wide. When I stepped into my house, the silence wrapped around me like an old friend. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter, staring out the window at the trees swaying gently in the wind. I expected to feel guilt. I expected the echo of my mother's voice, the sharp bite of Jason's laugh, the sting of Rachel's gasp. Instead, I felt peace. A tired peace, maybe, but peace all the same. I thought of my mother's eyes, that flicker of something like pride. I thought of Jason's stunned silence, Rachel's trembling fingers. And I thought, maybe for the first time in my life, that I was okay being the black sheep. Because the black sheep, I realized, isn't weak. It's just the first to break away. The next morning started like any other. Toast, coffee, the slow hum of a quiet life. But the moment I checked my phone, reality reminded me that quiet doesn't mean untouched. 6 missed calls, 3 voicemails, all from my mother. I stared at the screen for a long time before pressing play. Her voice came through the speaker, soft, strained, like she'd rehearsed what she was going to say a dozen times and still didn't believe it would work. Mark, sweetheart, I just wanted to say, I think maybe last night got a little out of hand. Your cousin, he didn't mean anything by it. Jason he gets carried away sometimes. Pause. A breath. Then something more vulnerable. And I know things haven't always felt fair. I see that now. I didn't before, not really, but I do now. Just call me, okay? I sat there, the phone still in my hand, the weight of her words heavier than I expected. I didn't know if it was an apology or damage control. Maybe both. But something about her tone, the crack at the end, the way her voice fell off like she was about to say more but changed her mind, made me pause. The second voicemail was shorter. Mark, please, don't shut us out. I miss you. The third was silence. A click, a sigh, then the beep. I didn't call her back. Not because I was angry, that had burned out sometime between the steak and the second bottle of wine last night, but because I needed space. Space to understand what had changed, and more importantly, what hadn't. For years, I'd been waiting for some grand moment when everything would make sense. When they'd see me, truly see me. But what I learned last night was this. Clarity doesn't come from their validation. It comes from letting go of needing it. My phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Jason. That was low, man. You embarrassed us. You happy now? I stared at the message, a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. I didn't reply. Because yes, I was. By late afternoon, the house was filled with soft golden light, the kind that makes even empty rooms feel full. I found myself standing by the window, watching the trees sway, phone still silent in my hand. I kept waiting for the next call, the one from Jason, maybe Rachel, or even my uncle. Some furious, half apology, half accusation about how I'd ruined the night, embarrassed the family, made it all about me. But the call never came. And slowly, it hit me, they weren't going to call. Because in their minds, the story had already been written. Mark, the difficult one. Mark, the ungrateful one. Mark, the outsider who never quite fit, and now had confirmed it by walking away. The realization didn't sting as much as I thought it would. Instead, it left an odd kind of quiet. Not the silence of loss, but the silence of a door finally shut. I thought about texting my mom, just a short message. I'm okay. Don't worry. But my fingers hovered over the screen, then fell away. She knew where to find me when she was ready. And for once, I wasn't going to chase after anyone. The house creaked softly as the sun dipped lower. I moved to the kitchen, poured myself a drink, nothing fancy, just a little bourbon over ice, and stepped out onto the porch. The air smelled like pine and cool earth. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the world felt both impossibly wide and peacefully small. For years, I'd been convinced that belonging meant earning my place at that table. Last night proved something I should have known all along. Sometimes the strongest move isn't fighting to stay in the room. It's learning to walk out of it. The knock came just after sunset. I was halfway through a book, the bourbon glass empty on the table beside me, when the sound pulled me back to the room. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. Who would bother driving all the way out here? But when it came again, firm, measured, I knew. I opened the door to find my mother standing there, wrapped in a light coat, her hands twisting around each other the way they always did when she was nervous. Behind her, the dark outline of the mountains framed the fading sky. Hi, Mark, she said softly. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I stepped aside, and she walked in. We sat in the living room without turning on a light, the glow from the porch casting long shadows across the floor. She looked down at her hands, turning her wedding ring round and round. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For all of it. I waited. For not seeing it sooner. For not speaking up when I should have. My throat tightened, but I stayed silent, letting her shape her own words. I guess I thought, she went on, that if you were the strong one, you didn't need as much. That maybe you didn't even notice how unfair it was. I almost laughed. Not out of cruelty, just the sheer absurdity of it. Of course I noticed. How could I not? She reached over, resting her hand on mine. You were always enough, Mark. More than enough. The house was so quiet I could hear the tick of the old clock in the hall. For the first time in a long time, I saw my mother not as the peacekeeper, not as the quiet enabler, but as someone trying to unlearn a lifetime of habit. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real apology. We didn't talk much after that. There was no need. She stayed a little while, and when she left, she hugged me tighter than she had in years. The next morning felt different. Not dramatic, not life-altering, just still. I woke before the sun, something I hadn't done in years without an alarm. The house was quiet except for the faint creaks of old wood settling, the kind of silence you don't notice when your mind is full of noise. I made coffee, stood at the window, and watched the first pale streaks of light brush over the mountaintops. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't running a mental checklist, no errands, no obligations, no rehearsed conversations playing in my head. Just me, the mountains, and the slow stretch of morning. I thought about Jason and Rachel, wondered how they'd spun the story, if they were calling it a betrayal, a meltdown, or just another chapter in Mark being Mark. I realized I didn't really care. That was the strangest part, the absence of care. For years, I'd measured my worth in their glances, their approval, their sly little jabs. But standing there with a mug in my hands, watching the sky turn gold, I felt free. Not triumphant, not vindicated, just free. My phone buzzed once on the counter. I walked over, half expecting another barrage of texts. But it was quiet. One message from my mother. Have a good day, sweetheart. Simple, unexpected, and somehow enough. I smiled, a small, quiet thing, and set the phone back down. Then I stepped outside, barefoot on the porch, feeling the cold wood under my feet, watching the light unfold across the hills. And I thought, maybe peace doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. Maybe it's a morning like this, still, soft, and entirely your own. Days passed. Then a week. I thought there might be fallout, that Jason would show up at my door, that Rachel would fire off a string of angry texts, that the family group chat would light up with thinly veiled attacks. But none of that happened. It was like I'd walked out of their script, and without their familiar lines to bounce off, they didn't know how to keep the play going. And in that space, that unexpected, echoing space, something shifted inside me. I started noticing things I hadn't before, how the late afternoon sun turned the trees outside my house to gold, how quiet the evenings were without the hum of obligation pressing in. I found myself lingering longer over coffee, letting books pull me deeper, taking long walks just because the air felt good on my skin. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I wasn't bitter or triumphant, or even waiting for an apology that might never come. I was just free. One evening, standing on my porch, I caught myself smiling at nothing, a soft, almost invisible curve of the mouth. And I realized that this was the victory I'd been chasing all along, without even knowing it. It wasn't about making them pay the bill. It wasn't about teaching them a lesson. It was about reclaiming myself. The black sheep, they say, is the one who never fit in. But maybe, just maybe, the black sheep is the one brave enough to stop pretending they ever had to.